Alright, it's our favorite holiday, Halloween. That exciting time of year when everyone takes on a role and indulges in the fantastic. It's the one time of year where we unabashedly flirt with our subconscious and celebrate together the things we would normally find abnormal or bizarre. So of course we gotta do an episode about it. Unfortunately, it seems we already did an episode on survival horror, so that's out. We've been racking our brains to figure out another good Halloween topic. We considered an episode on Lovecraft in games, but quickly abandoned that idea. We briefly considered doing an episode on propaganda games, which are the type of games James finds scariest. We even thought about trying to untangle the Silent Hill mythos, but nah. In the end, we were left with this. Symbolism. Well, it'll do. Today we're going to take 6 minutes to discuss what many people devote their lifetimes to studying. If you happen to decide this stuff is really interesting, then we strongly suggest reading works by Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, because we are about to butcher their ideas for you over the next several minutes. Well, let's get to it, shall we? The basic idea is that there are certain fundamental symbols that are deeply ingrained in us on a subconscious level. Some of these symbols are personal in that they relate only to the person viewing them, and some of them are universal in that we all have a basic reaction to them. For those of you who are familiar with Jung's ideas, I know we're really cutting corners and mixing terms around here. Please don't hate us. For the most basic example of a universal symbol, let's take the color red. Red is the color of fire and blood. Almost every culture uses it as a warning or a cautionary color. We see this used all the time in games. Enemies' names are highlighted in red, our targeting reticles turn red when over a hostile target, our characters or screens flash red when we take damage, our interfaces turn red when an enemy locks onto us, and you get the idea. Now, we could just as easily choose green or light blue to be the warning color in games, but this is almost unthinkable to most of us. Try and picture your character flashing blue or green when taking damage. Imagine seeing enemy names in the color of spring grass. Wouldn't really make sense, would it? Okay, so you can see how at least some of this psychology symbol stuff has value when designing games, right? Sweet. Now we can start talking horror. We're going to look at 3 core psychological concepts in regards to game design. The self, the uncanny, and the other. Let's start with the self. We all have a very firmly rooted subconscious understanding of ourselves, of what is us and what is not us. There are 3 parts to each of us: what we believe ourselves to be, what we are, and what we show the world. These 3 things constitute the self. The space between what we believe to be and what we are is a terrifying place. It is referred to in Jungian psychology as the shadow. In story-driven games, this is a great place for creating fear, or a cloying sense of discomfort. Take Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2. This character was a strict shadow of the main character. It was the manifestation of his self-denied sexual frustration and violent nature. In fact, look at all of Silent Hill 2. Every enemy and every character represents an aspect of the main character's psyche. But this is hardly the only way that we can use symbols to help us convey narrative or create fear in the player. See, we all have numerous root areas that leave us uncomfortable because they represent our baser nature. Things which we keep hidden or are ashamed of and have left unresolved. When you couple these things with a fear for the flesh, a fear for life itself, you get horror, created to be explored in a cathartic and meaningful way. Sexuality, parental issues, bigotry, our own insignificance. These are all issues that, when coupled with the most basic fear, the fear for life, leave us petrified. Not only at the moment that life is threatened, that monster pops out moment, but continuously, in a way that's harder to shake. You have to be careful not to be too heavy-handed in applying this type of horror to your game. It takes subtlety. But if you really look closely at a lot of your favorite works of horror, you'll often find that they deal with the character's secret shame. Or, even more creepy, the viewer's secret shame. The best horror designers use these principles in character, enemy, and even world design. If one is consistent with their application, one can convey a great deal of depth to the player without having to resort to a single written line. But that's enough about the self. Let's move on to one of the other great psychological principles of horror, the uncanny. The uncanny is a space where things are just slightly off. It is the realm of the unfamiliar familiar. We tend to be scared by things which are totally foreign to us, but oddly enough, we tend to be just as frightened, or at least unsettled, by things which are similar to us, but not completely. Have you ever felt unsettled around a gibbering transient or an amputee, even though you knew they were harmless? It's hard to admit it, but most of us have at some point. That feeling is the uncanny. It happens most often with human beings, because we're all hardwired to have a very specific, well-established expectation for how a human being is supposed to look and act. When those expectations aren't met, perhaps it reminds us of how fragile we are. Perhaps we're forced to face the fact that our most basic understanding of the universe might be wrong. Whatever the case, it leaves us unnerved. Some of the best examples of this are the works of David Lynch. If you watch Twin Peaks, or any of his films, really, you'll find that everything is just a little bit off. So even though nothing frightening is happening, the viewer is left disturbed, unsettled, perhaps even shaken. And it's a feeling they carry with them, even after they've turned off the TV. Deadly Premonitions recently tried to capitalize on this principle, but other games from Parasite Eve to Max Payne have used the uncanny to surprising effect. The uncanny allows the game designer to tell the player something subtle about the world and the character perceiving it. It lets the developer ask you to try to understand what's wrong and why, without simply telling you. Now, moving on from the uncanny, let's look at the third major psychological element in horror, the other. We've received many emails asking, why are Japanese horror games so much better than the ones we make here in the US? Well, I will say that they have one huge advantage. They are utterly foreign to us as a Western audience. When we try to interpret things, we can only do so through our own filter, our own tools for processing information. When we try to approach games from Japan, especially the ones heavily rooted in Shinto mythology, our frame of reference no longer applies. The symbols we've been given by our culture become meaningless, or take on strange and alien meanings. Our preconceived notions of what's normal and acceptable break down, and we simply have to accept the strange otherness of the world we're now in. But we can never be truly comfortable doing so. So are Japanese horror games just better? I don't really know, but many of them come to the Western audience with an element of otherness that is, in and of itself, unsettling. Of course, this is not to say the Japanese hold exclusive rights to this element. I mean, with enough thought and diligence, Western developers can capture that same unsettling otherness in their own games. Japan just has it a little easier. They don't have to make up anything new to get that effect. Whew, I cannot believe we made it through all that. For now, I hope that's enough food for thought to keep you busy these few days before Halloween. We'll probably do a broader episode on symbolism in games eventually. You know, I could probably make a really dangerous drinking game out of the number of times we say that. Well, that's all we got for today. Go have an awesome Halloween.